The same United States military that put a man on the moon also built a nuclear bazooka, guaranteed to kill the soldier firing it. A gun so slow you could literally dodge the bullet. And a helicopter so loud the enemy heard it coming from 40 miles away and had time to make coffee before it arrived. And those are just the first 3 on a list of 111 real declassified moments where America made the entire enemy side feel genuine pity. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and click the hype button because your friends need to see this immediately. 1. The US military spent $2 billion building the B-21 Raider stealth bomber, a plane so advanced that no radar system on Earth could detect it. The Pentagon was proud. The engineers were proud. Everybody was proud. Then a general, feeling festive, posted a birthday photo on Facebook, and right there in the background, visible to anyone with a smartphone and a zoom button, was the classified hangar holding the most secret aircraft in American history. $2 billion of stealth technology, defeated not by the Soviets, not by enemy hackers, but by a birthday cake and a general who just really wanted some likes. 2. The US Navy had a bold idea during World War II. Instead of dropping regular bombs on Japan, they would strap tiny incendiary devices onto live bats, release thousands of them over Japanese cities, and let nature do the rest. The bats would roost in buildings and blow everything up. Brilliant in theory. Catastrophic in practice. Some of the armed bats escaped during testing, decided they had no interest in Japan, flew directly back to the US airbase, roosted comfortably in an American hangar, and burned it completely to the ground. The enemy did not suffer. America's own hangar did. 3. The Pentagon, in its infinite wisdom, proposed placing a giant mirror in orbit around Earth to reflect sunlight directly into the eyes of Soviet soldiers on the ground. Not a laser, not a missile, a mirror. Scientists spent actual government money drawing up actual blueprints for this. Soviet generals, upon learning about it later, reportedly had no response because no response existed for something that aggressively ridiculous. America almost weaponized sunshine from space. 4. The US Air Force built a nuclear-powered aircraft in the 1950s that could fly literally forever without refueling. Sounds incredible, until the engineers casually mentioned that the radiation levels inside the cockpit would kill the entire crew long before they reached enemy territory. The plane could outlast any pilot who ever sat inside it. America built an immortal aircraft and forgot to build an immortal human to fly the thing. 5. The US military trained actual dolphins, gave them CO2 dart guns strapped to their snouts, and sent them underwater to hunt enemy frogmen. Real dolphins, real dart guns, real mission. The dolphins completed their training, accepted their weapons, looked around at the ocean, and simply refused every single order given afterward. They did not defect. They did not rebel. They just stopped caring entirely and went back to being dolphins. 6. The Pentagon spent years and real taxpayer dollars developing what officials internally called the gay bomb, a chemical weapon designed to make enemy soldiers fall romantically in love with each other instead of fighting. The proposal was completely serious. The research was completely real. It was submitted formally to military leadership. It won an actual Ig Nobel Prize in 2007. America tried to end wars with feelings and received a joke trophy for the effort. 7. For 20 full years, the Pentagon funded Project Stargate, a classified unit of trained psychic spies whose entire job was closing their eyes and remotely viewing Soviet military bases from thousands of miles away using only their minds. The program cost $20 million. The results were, generously speaking, inconclusive. For 2 decades, America's answer to Soviet intelligence was a group of people sitting quietly in dark rooms thinking very hard about Russia. 8. The US military developed the Davy Crockett, a nuclear bazooka small enough for one soldier to carry and fire on a battlefield. Terrifying concept. Catastrophic math. The weapon's minimum safe firing range was shorter than its own kill radius, meaning any soldier who fired it would die inside their own nuclear blast. America built a personal nuclear weapon and somehow forgot to make sure the person firing it could survive using it. 9. During World War II, psychologist B.F. Skinner, convinced the U.S. military to stuff live pigeons inside missiles and train them to peck a target screen to guide the weapon toward impact. The birds were trained. The missiles were built. The program was funded. Military officials sat in a room, watched pigeons successfully peck targets, and still canceled the entire project because nobody in that room could look a general in the eye and say the word pigeons seriously. 10. After Manuel Noriega fled into the Vatican embassy in Panama, the U.S. military rolled up loudspeakers outside and blasted heavy metal music at full volume around the clock to psychologically destroy his will to resist. Noriega was a dictator who had survived assassinations and coups. He was ultimately broken by Guns N' Roses at 3 in the morning. Several Iraqi soldiers at nearby positions surrendered early, just to make the music stop. 11. The OSS, during World War II, manufactured exploding chocolate bars coated in real dark chocolate, specifically designed to assassinate Adolf Hitler. The plan was to slip one into his personal food supply and watch history change over dessert. The bars were actually manufactured. The mission was actually approved. Agents were actually dispatched. Hitler, a man who survived multiple assassination attempts involving bombs and bullets, was nearly taken out by a candy bar. He never ate one. History remained intact. 12. Vietnam-era soldiers were issued a helmet liner so aggressively shiny it reflected sunlight like a signal mirror, strapped directly to their heads. In dense jungle, where survival depended entirely on not being seen, American soldiers were essentially wearing flashlights on their skulls. Enemy snipers could spot them from miles away through thick canopy. The military spent money making helmets, then spent more money making those helmets announce every soldier's location to anyone nearby holding a rifle. 13. The experimental XH-26 Jet Jeep helicopter was engineered for battlefield mobility and rapid troop support. It achieved one thing spectacularly. It was so thunderously, catastrophically loud that it could be heard clearly from 40 miles away. Every stealth mission it was assigned ended the moment someone turned the ignition key. Enemy forces did not need radar or scouts. They needed ears. America built a helicopter that announced itself like a foghorn before it crossed the horizon. 14. World War II military doctors began issuing soldiers experimental amphetamine cocktails to eliminate the human need for sleep entirely. The soldiers stayed awake. They also began hallucinating entire enemy units advancing through empty jungle. Sleep-deprived and chemically altered, they opened fire on trees, shadows, and open air for hours. The enemy was baffled. American soldiers were shooting at nothing with full conviction and tactical commitment. The jungle was fine. The soldiers were not. 15. The U.S. military designed a battlefield radio so technically sophisticated and operationally complex that it shipped with a 200-page operating manual. 200 pages! For a radio. Soldiers in the middle of active firefights were theoretically supposed to flip through this manual mid-combat to troubleshoot connectivity issues. Nobody read it. Nobody could. The radio sat unused in dozens of documented engagements because no soldier alive had 200 pages worth of free time during a gunfight. 16. During World War II, the U.S. Army secretly exposed its own soldiers to mustard gas experiments without their knowledge or consent. The results were classified immediately. The Army denied it happened for the next 50 years. The soldiers who participated were told nothing, treated for nothing, and compensated for nothing. America spent half a century pretending it never chemically burned its own men, then spent the other half quietly apologizing after declassified documents made denial mathematically impossible. 17. The gyrojet pistol was a genuine American military innovation that fired tiny self-propelled rockets instead of traditional bullets. Futuristic, terrifying on paper, embarrassing in practice. At close range, the rockets left the barrel moving so slowly that contemporary test reports noted a person could theoretically sidestep the projectile before it reached them. America built the world's first rocket pistol and somehow made it less immediately dangerous than a strongly thrown baseball at arm's length. 18. American psychological operations teams printed millions of surrender leaflets and airdropped them across Vietnamese villages, urging locals to lay down arms and come peacefully. Thoughtful strategy. One catastrophic oversight. The leaflets were written in a regional dialect spoken by essentially nobody in the villages being targeted. Millions of pieces of paper floated down onto people who could not read a single word printed on them. The villagers were confused. The trees were thoroughly informed. 19. The U.S. Navy built an actual flying saucer-shaped warship prototype in 1955 because apparently someone in the Pentagon watched too many science fiction films and filed a budget request. The craft was tested, fueled, and launched on its maiden flight. It rose approximately 2 feet off the ground. It hovered briefly. It landed. The program was canceled immediately. America's flying saucer program lasted 1 flight, achieved the altitude of a kitchen counter, and quietly disappeared. 20. Korea-era military combat rations included a completely unlabeled can of mystery meat distributed to soldiers with zero explanation of its contents or origin. Soldiers refused it almost universally. Those who opened it reported an unidentifiable gray substance with an aggressive odor. Official field tests later confirmed the mystery meat caused severe gastrointestinal illness at a statistically significant rate. The military had accidentally developed a ration that was more effective at incapacitating American soldiers than feeding them. 21. The U.S. military issued soldiers Arctic survival gloves so heavily insulated and structurally rigid that the fingers could not physically bend enough to squeeze a rifle trigger while wearing them. Gloves designed specifically for cold weather combat made cold weather combat completely impossible. A soldier stationed in Arctic conditions had 2 options: remove the gloves, fire the rifle, and lose fingers to frostbite. Keep the gloves, retain all fingers, and be entirely unable to shoot anything. 22. The U.S. Army deployed a massive armored combat train in the Philippines, confident that steel plating and mounted guns made it unstoppable. One problem: it ran on a single fixed track with no alternative routes. Enemy forces did not need superior firepower or advanced tactics. They needed a map and patience. They simply identified a curve in the track, waited comfortably, and ambushed the unstoppable armored train at the one place it had absolutely no choice but to be. 23. The U.S. Army's anti-tank dog program trained dogs to find food hidden underneath tank hulls, then strapped explosives to them and sent them toward enemy armor. Brilliant conditioning. Catastrophic oversight. The dogs were trained exclusively using American tanks. In real combat, they sprinted past every enemy vehicle on the battlefield and ran directly back toward Allied tanks instead. America spent considerable time and resources training dogs to blow up their own equipment with alarming enthusiasm and commitment. 24. The U.S. Army administered LSD to unsuspecting soldiers during the 1950s, hoping the drug would chemically manufacture fearless, unstoppable super soldiers. The results were immediate and spectacular in the worst possible way. Entire units dissolved into uncontrollable laughter. Soldiers sat down in fields and refused to move. Officers reported to superiors that their men were giggling at rocks. America's attempt to build chemically enhanced warriors produced the most cheerful, completely non-functional military unit in recorded history. 25. Someone inside the U.S. military approved development of a boomerang-shaped grenade, apparently without stopping to think through the core engineering problem with that particular shape. The prototype was built, a test was scheduled. An engineer threw it during the first official trial. The grenade returned, not metaphorically, physically returned toward the person who threw it and nearly removed his head entirely. All testing was permanently halted after one throw. The project was never discussed openly again. 26. During Gulf War psychological operations, the U.S. military blasted Frank Sinatra songs continuously at Iraqi frontline positions from powerful loudspeakers, intending to disorient and demoralize enemy soldiers. It worked differently than planned. A number of Iraqi soldiers walked forward with their hands raised in surrender while audibly humming along to the music. They were not broken by Sinatra. They were charmed by him. America accidentally used Old Blue Eyes to conduct the most pleasant mass surrender of the entire conflict. 27. Military food engineers spent considerable resources developing MRE pizza, specifically engineered to remain completely edible for 3 full years, sitting at room temperature with zero refrigeration. They achieved the goal technically. Soldiers who ate it described the experience as chewing wet cardboard that someone had briefly introduced to tomato paste from a distance. It was shelf-stable, nutritionally adequate, and aggressively terrible. The pizza did not expire for 3 years because nothing willing to decompose would go near it. 28. Early World War II. Higgins boat landing craft had no front ramp in their original design, which created one spectacular problem nobody apparently addressed before production. Soldiers reaching enemy beaches had to leap 6 feet over the front bow directly into open ocean before they even touched sand. They arrived at combat already soaking wet, potentially injured from the jump and completely exposed. The boat that was supposed to deliver soldiers to battle first required them to jump off a moving vessel. 29. The CIA hid a passive listening device inside a hand-carved wooden replica of the Great Seal of the United States, then gifted it to the American ambassador as a gesture of goodwill from Soviet schoolchildren. The ambassador displayed it proudly on his office wall. It eavesdropped on classified conversations completely undetected for 7 full years. The Soviets bugged America's own diplomat using America's own national symbol as the hiding spot. The audacity was genuinely historic. 30. The CIA commissioned a fake Saddam Hussein sex tape as a psychological destabilization operation, intending to humiliate him publicly and undermine his authority across the region. The tape was produced. It was reviewed by officials. It was then permanently shelved after everyone involved reached the same uncomfortable conclusion simultaneously. The tape was too embarrassing for Saddam. It was also too embarrassing for the CIA. It was too embarrassing for everyone in every room where it was screened. It was never released. 31. The U.S. Air Force built a vertical takeoff supersonic jet in the 1950s that genuinely achieved flight, which was remarkable. Engineers celebrated. Brass applauded. Then someone asked the obvious follow-up question that apparently nobody had raised during the entire design and construction phase. How does it land? Engineers reviewed their blueprints. Engineers reviewed each other. Nobody had built a reliable landing mechanism into the aircraft. America constructed a supersonic jet that could launch itself magnificently into the sky with absolutely no planned method of coming back down. 32. The 1917 Brewster body shield was personal battlefield armor designed to make infantry soldiers effectively bulletproof and unstoppable in combat. It achieved bulletproof. It forgot unstoppable. The suit weighed 250 pounds. The soldier wearing it could not stand up without assistance from other soldiers. He could not walk unassisted. He certainly could not advance across a battlefield. America built the world's most effective personal armor and accidentally created a soldier who needed rescuing before the battle even started. 33. The CIA engineered a fake mechanical beetle, planted a microphone inside it, and placed it near Soviet officials during a sensitive operation, confident in the disguise. The Soviets spotted it within minutes, not hours, minutes. An officer picked it up, examined it briefly, identified it immediately as artificial, and destroyed it on the spot. Millions of dollars of covert American engineering was defeated by a Soviet official who apparently knew what a real beetle looked like and found the CIA's version unconvincing. 34. Early military pagers issued during Desert Storm were supposed to provide secure battlefield communication for American forces operating in the Gulf. One catastrophic frequency oversight undermined everything. Iraqi state television's nightly news broadcast operated on an identical frequency. Every single evening at airtime, the news signal accidentally jammed every military pager across the entire operational zone simultaneously. American soldiers lost battlefield communication every night, reliably, on schedule, because a Baghdad news anchor went on air at 6 o'clock. 35. In 1950, the U.S. Navy sailed a vessel along the San Francisco coastline and covertly sprayed the entire city with bacterial aerosols to simulate a biological attack and measure dispersal patterns across a civilian population. Nobody told San Francisco. Residents noticed an unusual morning haze and assumed it was coastal fog rolling in from the bay, which it often did. The government successfully conducted a biological experiment on an American city, and the city politely assumed it was just weather. 36. The M247 Sergeant York was an anti-aircraft cannon developed over years at enormous expense specifically to identify and destroy enemy aircraft with precision targeting radar. During live demonstrations, it performed magnificently against one target: portable field latrines. The targeting system consistently, repeatedly, and with impressive dedication locked its radar onto the spinning exhaust fans of nearby U.S. Army portable toilets instead of aircraft. America spent millions developing an anti-aircraft system that was primarily effective against American bathroom infrastructure. 37. The U.S. Navy investigated whether parrots could serve as naval lookout sentries aboard vessels, reasoning that their sharp vision and vocal abilities made them natural early warning systems. Trainers worked with the birds extensively. The program collapsed when researchers documented an unavoidable problem. The parrots screamed ship positions, headings, and movements with equal enthusiasm, regardless of whether nearby vessels were friendly or enemy. America's parrot sentries were perfectly effective at alerting absolutely everyone in the ocean simultaneously without discrimination. 38. The OSS produced an entire propaganda film featuring a Hitler impersonator designed to humiliate and undermine enemy morale across occupied territories. Production was a disaster from the first day. The actor's fake mustache refused to stay attached to his face. It fell off repeatedly during filming. The crew, professional intelligence operatives on a classified wartime mission, could not stop laughing long enough to complete a single usable take. The film was never finished. The mustache defeated the entire operation. 39. The military constructed Fort Drum in Manila Bay, a concrete battleship permanently anchored to the seafloor, bristling with guns and completely immovable by design. Military planners believed a stationary fortification was strength. Enemy commanders believed it was a gift. Fort Drum could not reposition, could not evade, and could not surprise anyone. Its coordinates never changed. Enemy forces knew exactly where it was every single day of the war because it was bolted to the bottom of the bay. 40. Bullet-resistant steel plate vests were issued to infantry soldiers as protection against incoming rifle fire, which sounded like a reasonable idea until the metallurgy was tested properly. The vests stopped pistol rounds effectively. Standard infantry rifle rounds were a different story. When rifle fire struck the vest, the steel shattered into high-velocity fragments that sprayed inward toward the wearer. Soldiers wearing the protective armor were being wounded more severely than soldiers wearing nothing at all. 41. Civil War field surgeons competed openly with each other to see who could perform amputations at the fastest possible speed, treating surgical efficiency like an athletic event. One surgeon achieved such velocity during a documented procedure that he amputated the patient's leg, sliced through two of his assistant's fingers in the same motion, and nicked a spectator's coat simultaneously. The patient survived. The assistant lost fingers. The spectator nearly fainted. One surgeon managed to wound 3 people while technically only operating on 1. 42. WWI battlefield telephone wire was engineered deliberately thin to reduce weight and simplify field deployment across the front lines. The weight reduction worked perfectly. Everything else did not. Soldiers moving through trenches at night repeatedly tripped over the wire they themselves had laid, yanking connections loose and physically disconnecting entire frontline command networks mid-battle. American forces managed to sever their own communication infrastructure consistently and efficiently without any enemy involvement whatsoever. The Germans did not need to cut the wire. Americans handled that personally. 43. In 1956, the U.S. Army released 300,000 laboratory-bred mosquitoes over civilian towns across Florida to test whether airborne biological dispersal was operationally feasible as a weapon system. Nobody told Florida. Residents noticed an unusual surge in mosquito activity and complained to local authorities about a bad season. Health records from that period show an unexplained spike in insect-borne illness across the test zones. America conducted a biological weapons test on its own civilians and blamed the weather. 44. The military deployed the LRAD acoustic cannon, a device capable of projecting a focused voice directly into a human skull from hundreds of meters away with no visible source. Operators used it on combatants in field situations. Targeted individuals, hearing a clear disembodied voice speaking inside their own head with no explanation, became immediately convinced they were losing their minds entirely. America developed a weapon that did not injure enemies physically, but instead made them question their own sanity from a comfortable distance. 45. Union Army advisors during the Civil War formally submitted a proposal to deploy African war elephants as battlefield assets against Confederate forces, reasoning that the psychological impact alone would be devastating. The proposal reached senior leadership. Senior leadership had one question: where exactly were the elephants? Advisors reviewed their notes. The United States had no African war elephants. It had no mechanism to acquire African war elephants. The entire proposal collapsed because someone forgot America was not located in Africa. 46. The CIA officially hired professional magician John Mulholland and paid him government money to produce a classified tradecraft manual, teaching intelligence operatives sleight-of-hand techniques. The manual included detailed step-by-step instructions on how to slip poisons into a target's drink during a card trick without being detected. America's intelligence agency went to a magician, asked him to teach spies card tricks, and used the budget of a superpower to fund what was essentially a very dangerous dinner party act. 47. At First Bull Run, the Union Army's bugle call communication system collapsed into total chaos when multiple officers issued conflicting calls simultaneously across the battlefield. Both armies heard the signals. Both armies interpreted them as orders to retreat. Union forces retreated. Confederate forces also retreated. Two armies occupying the same battlefield simultaneously executed full retreats in opposite directions, each completely convinced the other had outflanked them brilliantly. The battle ended not because anyone won, but because everyone left at the same time. 48. The Navy installed electromagnetic pulse cannons aboard surface destroyers and scheduled a live firing demonstration to showcase the weapon's devastating offensive capability to military leadership. The cannon fired. The pulse radiated outward exactly as designed. It then disabled every electronic system on the launching ship simultaneously, including navigation, targeting radar, and propulsion. The vessel sat dead in the water immediately after firing its own weapon. America demonstrated an electromagnetic cannon by using it to successfully disable the ship it was mounted on. 49. Declassified documents from the 1970s confirmed that the U.S. Army released infected insects from low-flying aircraft over populated American cities during the 1950s to study biological dispersal patterns across civilian environments. The residents of those cities were never informed. No consent was gathered. No warnings were issued. Citizens went about daily life completely unaware that their government was conducting biological weapons research directly above their neighborhoods. The Cold War's most classified laboratory was apparently just suburban America on a Tuesday afternoon. 50. Gulf War. MRE pouches of chicken a la king were field rations designed to provide soldiers with warm, adequate nutrition in desert combat conditions. Desert temperatures had other plans. The pouches consistently superheated in the sun until internal pressure caused them to explode violently, spraying scalding sauce across everything within range. Soldiers began calling the resulting explosion chicken a la grenade. The military had successfully created a combat ration that injured soldiers before they could open it and eat it properly. 51. The U.S. military issued jungle combat boots to soldiers deployed in Vietnam, designed and approved by people who had apparently never personally visited a rainforest. The boots dissolved, not slowly. Within 2 weeks of consistent rainforest moisture, the soles detached completely from the uppers and fell apart mid-patrol. Soldiers completed active combat missions through dense jungle terrain and bare feet because their government-issued footwear had structurally failed underneath them. America sent men to war and forgot to send shoes that survived the climate. 52. The Navy's experimental hydrofoil combat vessel was engineered for speed and achieved it spectacularly, reaching 90 miles per hour during open water sea trials. Everyone was impressed. Then engineers delivered one additional piece of information they had apparently saved for after the celebration. The vessel had no effective braking system. Stopping from 90 miles per hour required 4 miles of open ocean to coast down safely. America built the fastest combat boat in the fleet and forgot to include any way to make it stop. 53. CIA operatives in the 1960s were issued spy camera eyeglasses designed to photograph targets discreetly without revealing the photographer's identity or intentions. The glasses worked photographically. They failed acoustically. The mechanical shutter inside the frames produced a distinct audible click every time a photo was taken. In any quiet environment, a library, a meeting room, a corridor, the click announced the photographer's activity clearly to everyone present. America's premier covert photography device advertised itself to every person in the immediate vicinity. 54. The Army conducted high-altitude parachute experiments on soldiers during classified testing without disclosing a critical detail about the pressure suits the subjects were required to wear. The suits were not fully pressurized. Soldiers jumped from extreme altitude in suits that could not maintain adequate pressure for the conditions they were jumping into. 4 test subjects landed unconscious on the ground below. America ran pressurized suit experiments on soldiers while quietly skipping the pressurization step and documenting the results carefully afterward. 55. VX nerve agent is among the most lethally efficient chemical weapons ever synthesized, capable of killing a human being through minimal skin contact within minutes of exposure. It was not developed by a military weapons laboratory. It was not created by a government scientist pursuing battlefield dominance. A civilian chemist in New Jersey accidentally synthesized it while attempting to develop a new commercial agricultural pesticide. America's most terrifying chemical weapon was invented by a man who was simply trying to kill bugs in a garden. 56. The OCSW Objective Crew-served weapon program consumed $50 million and 15 years of continuous development before military officials gathered to evaluate the finished product. The weapon functioned. It was accurate. It was technologically sophisticated. Engineers then disclosed the final operational weight. The completed weapon was heavier than the combined body weight of the 2 soldiers who were supposed to carry it into combat. America spent $50 million in 15 years building a gun that the people assigned to carry it physically could not lift. 57. The Navy deployed trained sea lions equipped with underwater cameras to guard nuclear submarine pens from enemy divers, reasoning that marine mammals made ideal covert sentries in open water environments. One sea lion had different plans. It escaped its handlers during a routine patrol, located a wild colony in the open ocean, rejoined them immediately, and was never seen again by anyone connected to the United States military. America's nuclear submarine security program lost an armed sentry to a better social opportunity. 58. The U.S. military invested heavily in an encrypted television battlefield broadcast system designed to give commanders secure real-time visual communication across active combat zones. The encryption was classified. The technology was advanced. A Soviet technical intern with a consumer-grade off-the-shelf radio receiver decoded the entire system within 48 hours of its first deployment. America built a classified, encrypted battlefield broadcast network, and a Soviet intern with hobby equipment cracked it before the first week of operation was finished. 59. The CIA developed what became known internally as the heart attack gun, a device that fired a dart of frozen shellfish toxin that dissolved completely on impact, leaving no detectable trace in the victim's body and producing symptoms identical to a natural cardiac event. The weapon was not theoretical, it was not rumored. In 1975, a CIA official carried it into a U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee hearing and placed it on the table in front of Congress as a show-and-tell item. 60. The Army's official field manual for the M16 rifle at the start of the Vietnam War contained one catastrophic sentence describing the weapon as self-cleaning. Based on that description, Cleaning kits were omitted from standard issue entirely. The M16 was not self-cleaning. In jungle humidity, it jammed with devastating reliability. Soldiers died in firefights because their rifles stopped functioning and no cleaning equipment existed to fix them. The deadliest sentence in Vietnam War history may have been written by a manual editor in an office. 61. The Navy's Mark 14 torpedo entered World War II as America's primary submarine weapon and immediately began failing in ways nobody officially acknowledged. The detonator was calibrated so sensitively that it triggered on the Earth's own magnetic field at certain depths, detonating harmlessly before reaching any target. Submarine commanders filed complaints for 2 full years. The Navy dismissed every single report. It took 2 years of documented battlefield failures and dead crews before the Navy formally admitted the torpedo they issued simply did not work. 62. The military designed camouflage uniforms specifically for jungle combat operations and tested the pattern extensively before issuing them to soldiers deploying into real jungle environments. The testing location was a painted studio. Designers evaluated the pattern against painted backdrops and artificial foliage under controlled lighting conditions. In actual living jungle with real vegetation and natural light, the pattern made soldiers measurably more visible against the foliage than standard clothing. America designed jungle camouflage in a room containing absolutely no jungle whatsoever. 63. The Army's Future Combat Systems program was the most ambitious battlefield modernization effort in American military history, consuming $18 billion across a full decade of development. The concept was revolutionary. Every component was networked. Every system was integrated. Every soldier would be connected digitally across the entire battlefield simultaneously. The program was canceled after 10 years. The entire networked battlefield concept had never once been tested with real soldiers on real terrain. $18 billion built a system that existed exclusively in PowerPoint presentations. 64. The CIA spent $20 million launching a reconnaissance satellite specifically designed to photograph Soviet military installations from orbit and deliver actionable intelligence to American analysts on the ground. The satellite launched successfully. It reached orbit without incident. A post-launch lens calibration error then pointed the camera slightly off target. For the first 6 months of its operational life, America's $20 million spy satellite photographed almost exclusively cloud formations and delivered them dutifully to analysts who needed pictures of military bases. 65. Operation Popeye was the classified U.S. military program that seeded clouds over Vietnam, using aircraft to artificially intensify monsoon rainfall and flood enemy supply routes into operational uselessness. The rainfall was successfully intensified. The flooding was real and significant. It also flooded the military's own supply infrastructure with equal enthusiasm and no discrimination between American and enemy roads. America weaponized rain against the enemy, and the rain, being rain, fell on everyone present regardless of nationality, rank, or which side requested the weather modification. 66. World War II military planners issued paratroopers escape maps printed on edible rice paper so that if captured, soldiers could consume the intelligence rather than surrender it to enemy forces. Clever solution. One unforeseen complication. During extended operations when standard rations ran out completely, soldiers faced a genuine choice between eating their food or eating their navigation. Several soldiers chose navigation. Paratroopers operating behind enemy lines ate their own maps during supply shortages and then had no idea where they were for the remainder of the mission. 67. The Army purchased thousands of M1 carbines fitted with an oversized winter trigger guard, specifically engineered to accommodate the thick gloves soldiers wore during Arctic warfare operations. The guard was designed to solve a real problem. It solved nothing. The guard was so dramatically oversized that even fully gloved hands rattled loosely inside it with no stability. Soldiers could not reliably operate the trigger with gloves on. The Arctic trigger guard, designed specifically for gloved hands, turned out to be useless for gloved hands. 68. The CIA airdropped millions of carefully forged Soviet ruble notes over Eastern Europe in a covert operation designed to flood the USSR's economy with counterfeit currency and trigger destabilizing inflation across the communist bloc. The rubles were convincing forgeries. The operation was executed successfully. Economists then calculated the total volume dropped was so insignificantly small relative to Soviet monetary supply that it produced zero measurable economic effect whatsoever. America counterfeited millions of Soviet rubles and accidentally demonstrated just how large the Soviet economy actually was. 69. The military issued pilot flight suits certified as fireproof and tested to resist flame up to a specific documented temperature threshold, providing aviators with confidence their gear would protect them during emergencies. One specification was quietly omitted from the certification paperwork. The temperature the suits were certified to resist was lower than the standard ignition point of the aviation fuel used in every aircraft those same pilots flew daily. America issued fireproof suits to pilots that could not withstand the fire produced by their own planes. 70. The U.S. Navy launched the USS Akron and USS Macon as flying aircraft carriers. Enormous airships designed to cruise at altitude and launch fighter planes directly into combat from their internal hangar bays. The concept was revolutionary. The execution was catastrophic. The Akron crashed. The Macon crashed. Both disasters occurred within 3 years of launch. Both killed most of the crew aboard. America built 2 flying aircraft carriers, lost both of them to weather within the same 3-year window, and quietly ended the program forever. 71. The Army tested a personal rocket belt in the 1960s designed to allow individual soldiers to leap over walls, trenches, and battlefield obstacles with effortless aerial mobility. Engineers strapped it to a test soldier. The soldier launched. Everything worked exactly as designed for 21 seconds. Then the fuel ran out. 21 seconds of flight time was the absolute maximum the system could achieve before becoming an expensive backpack. America developed personal flight technology for soldiers and produced something less useful than a running start. 72. The military's classified odor weapons research program set out to identify a single universally repulsive scent that would reliably disperse enemy combatants across every geographic and cultural theater of operation. Researchers tested candidates extensively across multiple populations from different regions and backgrounds. The conclusion was humbling. No single smell existed that every human culture found equally disgusting. Scents considered unbearable in one region were completely tolerable or occasionally pleasant in another. America spent classified funding discovering that people simply disagree about what smells terrible. 73. The CIA built a robotic catfish named Charlie in the 1970s as a covert underwater surveillance platform designed to infiltrate enemy waterways undetected among real marine life. Charlie cost millions of dollars to engineer and construct. He was anatomically convincing in appearance. He was not convincing in motion. Charlie swam measurably and demonstrably slower than every real catfish he was built to impersonate. America's premier aquatic spy robot could be outpaced by the actual fish it was disguised as without those fish even trying particularly hard. 74. The Navy's PT boat torpedo firing system had a documented engineering tendency that became apparent at operational speeds during combat conditions. When a PT boat fired torpedoes at high speed, the weapon's trajectory curved back in the direction of the vessel that launched it. Sailors operating these boats in active combat were firing weapons that occasionally turned around mid-water and came back toward them. America built a torpedo system where the most immediate threat to the crew was sometimes the torpedo they had just fired themselves. 75. Cold War military planners issued downed airman survival kits to pilots operating over foreign territory, including candy cigarettes intended to help pilots blend naturally into local civilian populations if they were forced to land behind enemy lines. The candy cigarettes were included thoughtfully. One detail was overlooked entirely. In the majority of regions where these pilots were deployed, candy cigarettes were completely unknown and had never been sold or seen. A downed American pilot offering candy cigarettes to locals identified himself as foreign more effectively than a uniform would have. 76. WW. soldiers faced their first large-scale poison gas attacks with no protective equipment, no gas masks, and no preparation whatsoever. Military doctors issued an emergency protocol immediately. The official solution was a urine-soaked cloth pressed firmly over the nose and mouth to neutralize the chemical agents in the air. The manual specified that soldiers should urinate on the cloth themselves if no water was available. America's first line of chemical warfare defense was a wet cloth and the instruction to make it wet yourself. 77. The Army's prototype rotobuggy was an experimental flying jeep concept designed to give ground vehicles aerial mobility by attaching rotary blades directly above a standard jeep chassis and launching it into flight. The concept was tested. The vehicle was tethered initially during early trials. Engineers then removed the tether for the first untethered free flight test. The rotobuggy entered an immediate and uncontrollable spin the moment it left the ground and was retired from the program before completing a single successful flight of any measurable duration. 78. World War II. Army medics used wound dressings pre-treated with sulfanilamide powder, an antibiotic compound that fought battlefield infections effectively and saved a documented number of lives across multiple combat theaters. It had one visually alarming side effect nobody initially anticipated. The powder turned wounds bright, vivid yellow on contact. Soldiers near casualties repeatedly and urgently reported chemical weapon attacks to command. Medics across multiple engagements spent significant time reassuring panicked soldiers that their comrades were being treated for infections and had not been struck by mustard gas. 79. The Vietnam-era XM202. Incendiary rocket launcher was fielded as a portable fire support weapon for infantry operating in dense jungle terrain against fortified enemy positions. Field reports began arriving from soldiers almost immediately after deployment. The launcher routinely ignited the ground directly in front of the soldier, operating it in humid jungle conditions before the projectile traveled any meaningful distance toward the target. America issued soldiers an incendiary weapon that reliably set fire to the area immediately surrounding the American soldier holding it. 80. Union Army officers formally proposed strapping explosive charges to trained hogs and driving them directly into Confederate fortifications as a low-cost alternative to conventional siege warfare tactics. The proposal was approved for an initial field test. A hog was selected, fitted with its explosive harness, and pointed toward the target. The hog chewed through its own harness, turned around, and ran enthusiastically in the completely wrong direction. The proposal was abandoned immediately. The Confederates never knew how close they came to being defeated by American livestock. 81. The CIA's black budget funded a classified research division tasked with investigating whether trained operatives could kill enemy targets using nothing but concentrated directed mental energy projected across distances without any physical contact or conventional weapon. Researchers were hired. Subjects were tested. Sessions were conducted in controlled environments with full government funding and oversight. Formal classified summary reports were filed, archived, and stamped with official seals. America spent intelligence funding discovering whether humans could think people to death and wrote up the inconclusive results in official paperwork. 82. World War II. Army medics carried morphine doses in metal syrettes designed for rapid battlefield pain management during combat casualties across multiple theaters of operation, including the European Winter Front. One material oversight undermined everything. Metal conducts cold efficiently and completely. In temperatures below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, standard winter conditions across the European front, the morphine froze solid inside the syrettes and became completely impossible to inject into anything. America issued battlefield medics frozen pain relief and sent them to the coldest front of the entire war. 83. The military's first encrypted battlefield pager network, deployed during the Gulf War, was designed to give American forces secure real-time communication advantages over Iraqi forces throughout the entire conflict. One frequency decision undermined the entire operation. The network broadcast on a commercially available band, accessible to anyone with basic radio equipment. Civilian journalists covering the conflict from press positions equipped themselves with standard radio receivers and monitored live American troop movements throughout the war in real time. The press corps had better battlefield awareness than some commanding officers. 84. The Army Corps of Engineers constructed a dam in Vietnam's Central Highlands, so structurally massive that its reservoir flooded extensively beyond the intended military infrastructure disruption zone. The flooding reached downstream villages belonging to South Vietnamese civilians who were American allies in the conflict. The dam successfully flooded Allied territory. The U.S. government then funded a complete emergency relocation program for all the civilians it had just displaced with its own dam. America built infrastructure to hurt the enemy and immediately paid to fix what it did to its friends. 85. The U.S. military's active denial system was a directed energy heat ray weapon, consuming $40 million, and over a decade of dedicated research and development before deployment to Afghanistan as a non-lethal crowd control solution. It was recalled after 1 month of field evaluation. Official assessment concluded its maximum effect on targeted individuals was roughly equivalent to a mild sunburn on exposed skin. America spent $40 million and 10 years developing a weapon whose most severe consequence was the same as forgetting sunscreen at the beach. 86. OSS agents, parachuting into Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II, carried cyanide suicide pills disguised as chocolate mints for use if captured and facing interrogation by enemy forces. The disguise was practical, and the intention was grim. Multiple agents in documented field incidents accidentally swallowed their suicide pills in the field, under stress and confusion, mistaking them for actual mints during tense moments. Against every probability and pharmacological expectation, several of them survived the accidental ingestion. America's suicide pills failed to work even when agents took them by mistake. 87. The military developed a prototype three-wheeled reconnaissance motorcycle specifically engineered for rapid scouting operations across Vietnam's varied terrain, designed to give infantry units faster ground mobility in the field. A demonstration was scheduled to showcase the vehicle's capabilities to military leadership and procurement officials in attendance. The motorcycle was wheeled out onto flat, completely level pavement for its very first official live demonstration run. It tipped entirely over on the flat pavement before reaching any meaningful speed. The audience watched a reconnaissance vehicle fail to handle a parking lot. 88. The military developed prototype night vision goggles to give soldiers tactical advantages in low-light and nighttime combat operations, allowing them to see clearly in conditions that left enemies completely blind. The goggles worked optically. They failed physically. The combined weight of the early prototype unit was so extreme that prolonged wear caused soldiers' neck muscles to strain forward under the load, making sustained use in the field painful and operationally impractical. America built goggles that let soldiers see in the dark and gave them neck injuries severe enough to look down at the ground instead. 89. The Army's classified Psychotronic Warfare Division allocated government funding toward researchers investigating whether soldiers could project lethal mental energy across distances toward enemy combatants without any conventional weapon, physical contact, or visible mechanism of harm whatsoever. The researchers were credentialed. The program had official oversight. Formal session reports were filed with military command. The program ran for multiple years on taxpayer funding before reaching conclusions that satisfied nobody. America funded a military division whose entire operational concept required soldiers to defeat enemies by thinking at them aggressively enough. 90. The military issued World War II fighter pilots Benzedrine PEP pills to sustain combat alertness during extended missions, reasoning that chemically eliminating fatigue would produce more effective and capable airmen in prolonged engagements. Post-war medical studies reviewed the results carefully and found the opposite. At high altitude, the drugs triggered psychotic episodes, paranoid delusions, and vivid hallucinations in pilots flying complex aircraft at hundreds of miles per hour through contested airspace. America gave its pilots amphetamines and discovered that hallucinating at altitude in a fighter aircraft is suboptimal for everyone involved. 91. The CIA printed millions of counterfeit Soviet postage stamps bearing subtle embedded propaganda imagery and airdropped them over the USSR, intending to introduce subversive messaging directly into ordinary Soviet civilian life through the most mundane object imaginable. The forgeries were visually convincing. The operation was executed with precision. Soviet postal inspectors caught the forgeries within weeks. Not because of the imagery, not because of the printing quality, because the glue formula on the back was distinctly American in composition and tasted nothing like Soviet stamps tasted. 92. The Navy deployed magnetic anchor mines during World War II designed to detonate upon detecting the magnetic signature of enemy vessel hulls passing within proximity of the device beneath the water surface. The sensitivity calibration was set too fine. The mines detonated when seabirds landed on the water surface nearby, triggered by the faint disturbance. Entire minefields became unpredictable and unreliable almost immediately after deployment. Allied shipping navigating through American minefields faced detonation risks from passing seagulls. America's naval mines were defeated by birds that had no opinion about the war whatsoever. 93. The military issued the Gyrojet rocket pistol to special operations units as a futuristic personal sidearm, marketing it as a revolutionary advancement beyond conventional firearms technology available to standard infantry. Field reports returned with a consistent and embarrassing observation. At close quarters, the projectile left the barrel at such low initial velocity that contemporary accounts documented it could not reliably penetrate a target at arm's length distance. America issued special operations soldiers a rocket pistol that was less immediately dangerous up close than a firm punch, delivered with a closed fist. 94. The U.S. Army positioned its own infantry soldiers in open trenches, just miles from live atomic bomb detonations during nuclear test exercises in the Nevada desert throughout the 1950s, exposing them to radiation, blast pressure, and thermal effects without adequate protection or informed consent from the soldiers themselves. The stated purpose was studying psychological and physiological responses to nuclear detonations in combat conditions. The soldiers were not told the full extent of what they were being exposed to. America tested nuclear weapons on enemies abroad and nuclear exposure on its own soldiers at home. 95. The OSS constructed elaborate networks of fake oil storage facilities, dummy industrial buildings, and false infrastructure across North Africa specifically to deceive Axis aerial reconnaissance into wasting bombing sorties on non-existent targets. The deception worked spectacularly. Enemy aircraft bombed the fake facilities repeatedly across multiple raids, expending ordnance, fuel, and crew effort on structures containing nothing of military value. Many dummy sites absorbed hundreds of enemy air sorties successfully. America built fake targets, and the enemy bombed them with complete conviction and admirable thoroughness for months. 96. Battlefield communication relied on telephone exchange systems that connected frontline units to command posts through manually operated switchboards, requiring trained operators to complete every single call. Connecting one frontline call required 12 operators working simultaneously across the exchange network. Each connection took significant time to establish through the chain of operators. By the time a frontline commander successfully reached command to report a tactical development, the situation on the ground had already changed entirely. America's WWI telephone system was so slow, it delivered yesterday's battlefield intelligence to commanders making today's decisions. 97. The Navy's prototype submarine-launched ballistic missile system underwent its first test in 1947 and performed successfully on the initial launch, which was considered a significant technical achievement by everyone present at the surface observation post. The submarine then lost radio contact with Surface Command completely. For 3 full hours, no vessel in the entire fleet could locate, contact, or communicate with the submarine carrying America's newest ballistic missile system. The first submarine missile test succeeded technically, and then the submarine simply vanished for an afternoon with no explanation. 98. The Army issued soldiers deployed across the Pacific Theater personal water purification tablets designed to make local water sources safe for consumption during extended jungle operations far from established supply lines. The tablets worked chemically, they failed palatably. The purification compound produced such an aggressively bitter chemical taste that treated water became nearly undrinkable to most soldiers. Troops in the field made a practical decision and chose untreated jungle water instead, then suffered dysentery at significantly higher rates. America solved the contaminated water problem and created a solution soldiers preferred dysentery to. 99. The military developed a sniper camouflage suit from synthetic materials in the 1960s, marketed internally as an invisible army solution. Designed to make individual soldiers effectively undetectable in field environments against any terrain or vegetation type encountered during operations. Field tests produced one finding nobody had prioritized during development. The synthetic material trapped body heat with extraordinary efficiency. Soldiers wearing the suit in field conditions passed out from hyperthermia within 20 minutes. America built the perfect camouflage suit and made it impossible to wear for longer than a coffee break. 100. The CIA built a remote-controlled mechanical dragonfly called the Insectopter in the 1970s as a micro-aerial surveillance platform, small enough to operate undetected in outdoor environments near surveillance targets. Engineers were proud of the engineering. The dragonfly looked convincing. It flew adequately in controlled indoor conditions. Program managers then took it outside for operational testing and discovered one grounding limitation that ended the program permanently. The Insectopter could not fly in any crosswind exceeding a light breeze. America's micro-surveillance dragonfly was grounded by weather conditions mild enough for a picnic. 101. The Army's first official parachute design was developed and ready for issue to WWI pilots flying combat missions over enemy territory at significant altitude with no survival option if their aircraft was destroyed or became uncontrollable during flight. Senior Air Service Command reviewed the parachutes and rejected them. The official reasoning was that providing pilots with a reliable escape option would make them too willing to abandon functioning aircraft rather than press through dangerous situations. America had working parachutes for its pilots and decided giving them a way to survive was bad for morale. 102. The military issued M16 rifles to South Vietnamese Allied forces as part of a military assistance program designed to modernize their combat capabilities and improve battlefield effectiveness against North Vietnamese units. No training on cleaning or maintenance was provided alongside the weapons. The M16 required specific and regular maintenance to function reliably in humid jungle conditions. South Vietnamese soldiers received the rifles, received no instruction, watched the rifles jam on first use, concluded the weapons were defective, abandoned them in the field within days, and went back to whatever they had before. 103. The Navy issued its first submarine periscopes to American crews during WWI as essential navigation and targeting equipment for underwater operations against enemy surface vessels in active combat zones. Crews submerged on their first operational patrols and raised their periscopes to navigate and identify targets. The periscope lenses fogged over completely with condensation within minutes of submerging in cold water. Crews navigated, positioned, and aimed torpedoes at enemy vessels they could not see, through equipment designed specifically to let them see. America's submarine crews fought essentially blind, using their primary sighting instrument. 104. The Army deployed massive concrete dragon's teeth anti-tank barriers across defensive lines in the Pacific Theater, engineering them to stop enemy armored vehicles from advancing through strategic positions and choke points across the battlefield. Engineers later ran calculations on the actual operational impact the barriers produced throughout the conflict. The barriers slowed Allied supply vehicles attempting to move through their own defensive lines more significantly than they ever impeded or delayed enemy armor attempting to breach those same positions. America built obstacles that were more effective against American trucks than against enemy tanks. 105. The military's Bat Guano bomb program proposed harvesting the enormous guano deposits found in American cave systems to manufacture battlefield explosives at scale, reasoning that the material's chemical composition made it viable as a large-volume, low-cost munitions ingredient for the war effort. Project planners ran the supply chain mathematics carefully before proceeding. Collecting sufficient guano quantities to meet minimum operational requirements would require continuous around-the-clock harvesting for over 400 years. America proposed a weapons program and discovered it needed to start harvesting in the 1500s to be ready. 106. The U.S. military tested a bulletproof shield mounted directly onto a standard infantry bicycle during WWI, designed to give foot soldiers mobile frontal protection while advancing across open ground toward enemy positions under fire. Procurement officials reviewed the combined specifications before approving field trials. The combined weight of the bicycle frame and the mounted bulletproof shield exceeded the average body weight of the soldier expected to sit on it and pedal it forward across a battlefield. America built a mobile armored bicycle that the soldier assigned to ride it could not physically move. 107. The Army Air Corps developed the XCG-16, a giant motorized military glider specifically engineered to carry fully loaded tanks silently into battle behind enemy lines, combining the stealth of unpowered flight with the firepower of armored vehicles upon landing. A loaded test flight was scheduled to demonstrate the concept to military observers. The XCG-16 was loaded with its intended cargo weight and positioned at the runway. It broke apart structurally before leaving the runway entirely. America's tank-carrying stealth glider was defeated by the weight of the tank it was specifically designed to carry. 108. The military issued chemical detection paint to vehicles and field equipment during WWI, a compound engineered to change color visibly in the presence of poison gas and alert soldiers to immediate chemical attack before symptoms developed. Field deployment revealed the paint had additional color-changing triggers nobody had adequately tested for during development. It also changed color in rain. It changed color in humidity. It changed color in morning dew. It changed color in bright sunlight. Every weather condition Europe offered activated America's poison gas detector, making it functionally indistinguishable from a paint that simply changed color constantly. 109. The USS Monitor became one of the most celebrated naval vessels of the Civil War after winning its famous ironclad battle against the Confederate Virginia in Hampton Roads, demonstrating the future of armored naval warfare to the entire watching world. 4 months later, it sank in a moderate Atlantic storm. The Monitor's revolutionary design sat so extremely low in the water that ocean waves washed directly and continuously over the main deck during any significant sea conditions. America's most celebrated warship survived Confederate ironclad cannons and was sunk by medium-sized waves 4 months after its famous victory. 110. The Army developed a voice-activated battlefield command system in the 1980s, intended to allow soldiers to issue orders and operate equipment completely hands-free during combat, eliminating the need to physically interact with controls during active engagements. Operational testing revealed one fatal flaw in the recognition software that made deployment in any real environment impossible. The system could not distinguish between an American regional accent and a foreign accent reliably enough for operational use. Every multinational exercise produced miscommunications. America built a hands-free battlefield command system that worked exclusively when everyone present was from the same zip code. 111. The CIA surgically implanted a microphone inside the ear canal of a living cat, transforming the animal into a mobile covert listening device capable of being directed toward Soviet targets in public spaces without raising any suspicion whatsoever. The program cost $20 million and required genuinely sophisticated surgery to complete successfully. The cat was released on its first operational mission in Washington near a Soviet target. It walked into the street and was immediately struck by a taxi. $20 million of surgical espionage technology was defeated on its very first mission by ordinary urban traffic. And that right there is your government at work, spending billions of dollars, decades of research, and the finest military minds in human history to accidentally blow up their own hangar, sink their own ships, and lose a $20 million spy cat to a taxi on the first day. If you learned something today, or if you just feel a little better about your own life decisions, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Dumb History because we find the stories they forgot to burn. And drop a comment below which one of these made you feel the smartest person in the room.